The UAW, the United Auto Workers, they have been doing the damn thing. In the beginning, when they announced their strike, you guys may remember, I didn't agree with the strategy that they wanted to do. I didn't agree with this strategic strike strategy where they were going to strike at maybe one or two locations and then spread from there. I wanted all locations to go on strike at once, but it seemed to have worked for them. And I came back and I said, my bad, my bad. Don't agree with them, going forward with endorsing Joe Biden. I did not agree with that. But Sean also said, Sean's the president of the UAW, that even though the union decided to endorse Joe Biden as president, that most of the union members, he said, are not going to be voting for Joe Biden. So I thought that was interesting. You have to understand that a lot of these unions are paid to endorse certain politicians. So that's important for people to understand. But one of the things that the UAW president Sean said is that this was going to be a part of a much larger project, that they were actually going to encourage other auto workers to also go on strike and also try to unionize with the UAW. And we're seeing the first of that success. This is a historic win here in this country, because now Volkswagen workers in Tennessee have decided to unionize through the UAW. This has never been done before. We're going to get into this story, starting out with some good news. Let's give it up for the damn workers.
Workers at a Volkswagen plant in Chattanooga, Tennessee, voted overwhelmingly to join the United Auto Workers Union, marking a major breakthrough for the labor movement in America. On Friday, some 73% of workers at the Tennessee plant voted in favor of joining the UAW. This is the first time that a foreign car maker's plant in the South has voted to unionize. Now, this is a huge deal because the American South has been skeptical and even hostile toward labor unions for decades.
Pause there for a second. So some of you may not have been aware of that. I lived in the South before, so I was aware of that. Some people actually are wondering, they're like, wow, I didn't know there was a Volkswagen plant or Volkswagen workers in the United States. I thought Volkswagen was made in Germany. But there are still Volkswagen workers here. Just like in South Carolina, there's also a BMW plant that actually employs a lot of people in South Carolina. In fact, I knew a lot of people that worked at that BMW plant there. So, but this is huge news. And this is just the beginning, because now that Volkswagen has decided to do this, the employees have decided to do it. This could also, create a domino effect for other auto workers in the South. So they may have started a thing. Let's continue.
Republican leaders and the business community in the South have warned for years that unionizing would mean a loss of jobs. And this Chattanooga Volkswagen plant had previously voted against joining the UAW twice, in 2014 and again in 2019. All of this comes about 5 months after UAW workers ratified historic new contracts with record wage gains and improved benefits at the big three automakers in Detroit. With this win out of Tennessee, the UAW will expand its focus to other southern plants, hoping to organize at least half a dozen more over the next 2 years. Another vote will take place next month at a Mercedes-Benz plant in Alabama. Joining me now to talk about the power of American labor movement is Sarah Nelson, International President for the Association of Flight Attendants. And while you're not...
Pause for just a second. Sorry to interrupt, but I just wanted to pause there for just a second. That said, did you hear what he said about the Mercedes-Benz plant in Alabama? Now they're looking to create some type of union, to unionize with the UAW. This is what I'm saying, guys. This is going to spread, which is good news. A lot of times when I come onto the show, I say something is going to spread and it's bad news, but this is actually good news that is going to spread. They are doing the damn thing.
An auto worker, Sarah, there are similarities between the auto workers and the auto workers union in the North, and the sort of things that have gone on with flight attendants and airline workers. There's a lot of history here, and this feels really monumental to me.
This is monumental, Ali. This is an extraordinary win, but it is coming off the backs of the strike. and showing the American worker that we can fight and we can change the conditions in this country. Every single person across the country is working 2 and 3 jobs to survive. Forced overtime, our time and our money has been taken from us. And so this is not just a fight in the South, although the South is really where we've got to win big, because this is where workers have been exploited the most, oftentimes to attract companies from outside the country and to bring those companies in on the backs of the workers who have subsidized those companies with low wages and a lot more time on the job.
Yes. And another thing that I want to add here that I think is also important, we need to think about what this really means. When Starbucks employees went on strike, when Chipotle employees went on strike, when all of these different restaurant employees were trying to, create a union, or they received a lot of pushback. There were some Starbucks locations that decided to close permanently instead of just allowing these employees to unionize. Some of the Starbucks locations decided to fire employees that were trying to unionize. I've interviewed some of them on the show. So there were a number of challenges that these employees were met with when they tried to create a union. One of the things that I said back then is, what if the Starbucks employees, along with Chipotle, McDonald's, and all these other restaurant employees all got together and tried to create, some type of union together? What if they all decided to join hands in this? And I think about how more powerful that would have been at that point in time if they were doing that. At that time, everybody was just kind of fighting for their own thing, but they actually would have had more power if other restaurant employees would have united across restaurant lines, right? So the UAW apparently figured that out. And when they decided to go on strike, again, they warned people early on that this isn't just about UAW. This isn't just about the plants here. We are going to expand this. We are going to get other auto workers to unionize as well. And as we can see, that is happening. So kudos for them to stick into their word.
Sarah, talk to me about the threats. During the strike, the thing that came out was always, you're going to lose your jobs. In fact, some of the automakers started shutting down plants and laying off workers. That's always the threat. Prices will go up. You'll lose jobs. Bad for everyone. It has worked in the past as a fear-mongering tactic. What's changed in the last year or two?
What's changed is that workers see that tactic is a tactic to continue to make us desperate for this work, to make us feel lucky that we should have a job, rather than helping these companies understand that they should feel lucky to have our work. And so workers are saying it has gone backwards for so long, and the only place that we're seeing a difference is in corporate greed. This is all of our work, all of our time has been pushed to Wall Street. It has been pushed to billionaires. And if we don't take a stand, it's never going to change. So those threats of closing those plants is a near-term threat. But what UAW was able to do was to lock in long-term job security, and even job security as the EV industry continues to grow.
And that was very smart of them. They obviously had a plan. They didn't just try to throw something together. They were thinking about, how is this going to benefit us in the long term? And we'll get into the general strike strategy in just a second, because that was another thing that they also talked about doing in the near future. But she's 100% correct there, spot on, when she says that we have basically been brainwashed, at least in this country, that we should be happy that we even have a job, instead of the other way around. The employers should be happy to have us as employees, because without the workers, do you continue to have a business? No workers, no business. No business, no customers, right? So all of these things are connected. And when all of these employees decide to go on strike or decide to unionize, they are basically telling their employer that we know our worth and that you don't value our work.
We saw strikes or threats of strikes in the last year, and in many cases, remarkable successes that came out of them, from the Teamsters, from the United Auto Workers, from SAG-AFTRA. In your industry, there were several of those close calls in some cases. What's the issue with the South, and why is there movement in the South that we've not seen? Look,
I think we're seeing movement in the South because people are just really hurting. And they're fed up. The pandemic showed us that not only have we been treated as a cost line item with all of these companies, but actually that we were treated as disposable. You had people in meat packing plants being forced to go in there, and you had executives laughing about who was going to be the first worker to die from COVID. So we have seen very clearly that we're in this together across industries. Flight attendants are fighting right now for record-breaking contracts, and just like the auto workers were. And we need a giant step forward because we're also facing legacy sexism that has kept the value of our jobs lower than it should be. We're fighting to get paid for our time at work. This is a major issue across industries, that workers are forced to do work where they're not paid at all. And so these are some of the same issues that we're fighting across the board in every industry. And when other workers see that workers are winning, that encourages them to stand up. We're organizing 28,000 flight attendants at Delta Airlines. And I can tell you, they were watching this vote. They were watching to see that workers in the South could win. That's a Southern company based in Atlanta. This meant something to them. This spoke to their heart. This is their communities. They know people in those plants. They often have brothers or sisters or mothers or fathers or uncles, aunts, and they can relate to this. So this is very much, a connection between workers and the basic connection around humanity and what we have to stand up for and expect that this economy needs to be built for us, not for the billionaires.
One other thing I want to add too about unionization in the South. Let's think back to the Great Migration. Remember, during the Great Migration, when you had Black people from the South, they were moving to the Northeast and they were moving to the Midwest. They moved to what used to be pretty thriving cities that had a lot of manufacturing jobs at that point in time. So they moved to places like Chicago, Indianapolis, they moved to Pittsburgh, they moved to Philadelphia, all these different places during that point in time. What you have to remember, a lot of the unions existed in those areas. A lot of the people that moved to Chicago that were working at these plants, remember, they were unions. They had that there. Whereas in the South, having that same or similar job, they didn't have that. So they saw that great opportunity in those cities. And that was one of the reasons why they moved, because that's where a lot of the jobs were, and they could be part of a union. Now, there were differences in between those unions. I'm sure we all know. But we have to realize, and I've said this for a long time, sometimes it can take the South a little bit longer to come around to things that the East, the Northeast, and the West Coast, and even sometimes the Midwest is already doing. And sometimes, and I noticed this when I lived in the South, like sometimes those things wouldn't happen in the South until years later. So that's why this is such a big deal. Because they were very much against this. You heard so yourself a couple years ago. He said that the workers, they decided to vote against trying to join the UAW. But we also have this issue with inflation. The economy is not good for the everyday working American in this country. And so people are using their brains and they're looking around and they're like, wait a minute now, these grocery prices are increasing. The gas prices are starting to increase again. The economy is not doing well, despite what Joe Biden is saying. And at the same time, I have this job and I've been working at this plant for 10, 15, some of these people 20 years, right? And I'm not even a part of a union. I don't really have any rights that I thought I did. And then they see the UAW getting a win. So it always helps when you see employees going on strike, getting a win, because that encourages other people to try to do the same thing.
Sarah, great to see you. Thank you this morning. I know you made some accommodations to join us this morning, so we're deeply appreciative of that. Sarah Nelson is the international president of the Association of Flight Attendants, CWA, AFL-CIO. Hey, everyone.
Goodbye, Allie. Yeah, so huge news. We're starting out with a good story, but I also want to remind you what Shawn Fain said when they decided to go on strike. Yes, he did say this was going to expand to other auto industries. That was their plan. But there was something else that he said they are going to do later on. And if this happens, this is going to be really huge. Those of us at RBN have been calling for this for years.
Something that's not talked about a lot, but it's very significant, is we set a new contract deadline for May the 1st, 2028, May Day, International Solidarity Day. We did this for two reasons. I've always thought in my walk as a union rep that September was the worst time in the world to be going out on strike because sales start lagging when we get into the winter months. May made a hell of a lot more sense, but it also made sense to do it in a unified approach. We got to get back to the days, we got to pay for our sins of the past. Back in 1980, when Reagan at the time fired the Patco workers, everyone in this country should have stood up and walked the hell out. We missed the opportunity then, but we're not going to miss it in 2028. That's the plan. We want a general strike. We want everybody walking out, just like they do in other countries.
That part right there, the call for a general strike. So their contract ends in 2028. And the plan that they want to bring forward is to establish a general strike by that time. And if you're talking about a general strike, you do need time to plan for that. That's not something that you can do overnight. You have to make sure you have enough mutual aid. You have to make sure you have enough resources to take care of everyone that's going on strike. But the reality is, if those people aren't working, the parts don't move. The parts don't move. The cars aren't put together. The cars aren't put together. The cars are not sold. It's just the reality of the situation. So just wanted to remind you of what he said back then, that they wanted to move forward for a general strike. And those of us at RBN, we've been calling for this for years. The very first year that we actually formed, we had a general strike summit. It was like a big deal for us. Apparently, it made a lot of noise. A lot of people were really upset about us talking about why we need a general strike. It was really weird. But you're going to see more people starting to call for this because, again, the politicians are not helping the people. Obviously, the corporations are not going to help the people, and the oligarchs are against the working people, right? So as we've said before, the main thing that you need to happen is a general strike. You have to find a way to disrupt those flow of goods and services, and that is not something that you can do overnight, but at a point, we will get to that in this country, I believe, if things continue the way that they are. So shout out to the workers at Volkswagen for taking a stand. Hopefully this spreads throughout the South and really makes some noise. Yeah. JB says, yeah, it was a 3-day summit. It was ahead of its time. It was. It definitely was. People were not trying to talk about it at that point in time. But we were. Let's go to some of the comments here. Justo says, yes, they are like that in Missouri. They play videos before a job to tell you not to join a union and snitch on people who do. Wild, isn't it? Dr. Nick says Volkswagen made in Mexico. Oh, Mexico. It used to be made in Germany. I guess they decided to get cheap with their parts too. JB says, when they said the South will rise again, I bet this isn't what they had in mind. Ha ha ha. No, it's not. Shout out to Troy for the super chat. 1, more unions. 2, we need more worker co-ops. I agree. 100%. You know what, I always say on here, a union should never be the end game. The end game should always be worker co-ops, if we can go a step further. Thank you, Paula, for the super chat. I live in Chattanooga. It was truly great to see. What is up, Paula? What's up, fam? The Oracle says, and let's not overlook the fact that the South is really the plantation South. There you go. I told you, when I lived down South, we always got things last. John, Pastor Wheeler, hello. The Massachusetts Teachers Union, and the Massachusetts teachers have unions and they aren't allowed to strike. Yes, there's a law in Massachusetts that unfortunately teachers are not allowed to go on strike. I call BS. I know that they have actually requested that the governor of Massachusetts remove that law, but I haven't seen that happen. But thank you for bringing that up as well. Thank you, Tony D, for the super chat. Thank you for your show. You are welcome. You are welcome.